This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's position battles heading into its season opener against West Virginia, and then break down the matchup with the Mountaineers and Morgantown. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State football beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder, doing the same at The Athletic. And Audrey, I feel like I've said this for the last 3 weeks, but we are like 4 days away from a Penn State football game in 2024. And I think
Week
some
one.
of the, I think
It's
some
here.
of the, yeah, but the excitement is ramping up, right? Like this is, I don't want to call it a make or break season, but I think there's obviously a lot on the line for Penn State this year, given the expansion to 12 teams in the playoff. And listen, there's still a lot undecided about this team too.
Yeah, John, I mean, we went through it last week in our season preview episode. You and I both have Penn State making the 12-team field. And then we both agree that we don't have them getting past that first round. But we also, we know that we can be proven wrong, right? There's fair reason to believe that we are incorrect. But I think this is I absolutely love this time of year for so many reasons, right? We get the return of our Saturday rituals, which for you and
Yes.
I looks a lot different than fans at home. Just a quick example, right? Noon kick Saturday, Morgantown, games on Fox. I will probably make sure I'm in the stadium by about 9 a.m. at the latest because traffic, I'm thinking, is going to be crazy. Probably going to be at least a 12-hour workday, and that's not figuring out, getting back from Morgantown, all that stuff. The days are long, but this is the whole point of the year for us, right? Half of our year, we're insanely busy. Then the other half of the year, we're trying to figure out, through spring ball, different recruiting changes, coaching staff changes. It all builds up to this, right? How do the puzzle pieces fit together? And this is why, you and I do what we do, because this is the time of the year that everybody cares about it most, right? If you're a new listener to the Nittany Dispatch, we're glad you found us. If you've been with us since last September, we're happy you're still here. And please tell a friend. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But we're happy to be here with you. Excited to go on this journey of this season with you. And again, you and I both very well could be wrong, but we do have them making the playoff field. And if you as a fan can't get excited about that, right? If the mindset is national championship or bust, which I've heard a lot about, I've seen a lot about that on Twitter and those kinds of things. Come on, enjoy the ride, have some fun. Maybe they'll prove you wrong, right? If that's your mindset every year, you're just going to consistently be let down.
Yeah, I don't. And listen, I'm a bit of a fatalist with regards to sports. I'm a Philly sports fan. I totally understand that. But these things tend to happen and be the most fun when the journey is the most exciting, right?
Yep.
The 2017 Eagles Super Bowl. I know the team was elite for a large part of the season, but once Carson Wentz went down, they were written off, right? And it came out of nowhere, despite them being the top seed in the NFC, and that was honestly the most fun I've had following a team, right? The 2008 Phillies, before they were expected to be any type of juggernaut, they were the team that won the World Series. They were, I would argue, the worst team in that stretch run of great Phillies teams, and they were the one that won it. So I think, and by the way, you mentioned we could be wrong. Part of the fun of a 12-team playoff is it introduces so much more chaos. Football is unlike any other sport because it is a one-game playoff. There's no series, nothing like that. This is as small of a sample size as you can get, and you can get a one-off of a NCAA tournament run of all of a sudden Kansas State's in the national title game or something like that, right? This
Any
is
given Saturday, John. Any given Saturday, right?
yeah, and it's all on the table.
Thursday now, or
Right.
Monday.
Yeah, or maybe a Friday. But everything is on the table, and despite what your favorite pundits say, presumably it's myself and Audrey are your favorite pundits if you're here. But despite what we say, despite what they say, what anyone says, it's all on the table, and that is true for Penn State. And I do think it's worth noting it doesn't go off the table if they lose on Saturday either. And I think that's part of the excitement with this year too, is there is a lot more at stake at the end of the year, and maybe a little bit less at stake from a game-to-game basis until you really get down to a third loss or something like that.
Well, and once you hit that stretch run in October, but what I like about this year too is that we're going to know a heck of a lot about this team by Saturday at about 3:30 p.m. Eastern, right when the game ends, because this whole offseason, it's about, well, what does the offense look like? How do they look? And I don't think I'm revealing a great big secret here when I tell the fans that they've seen as much of this offense as we have in live settings, right? Like you and I were at the Blue White game, fans were at the game, watched it on TV. We have not seen this team in a scrimmage setting, in an 11-on-11 setting, in a like truly competitive setting at all this preseason, right? So again, as much as it's, well, how does this guy look? How has that guy looked? We are in the dark on a lot of that, especially this preseason, because Penn State has kept it a little extra under wraps, which maybe that's by design with the new OC, presumably. Maybe it isn't, I don't know. But, I think these are kind of some of those things that you want to see on Saturday, right? And you want to know, how does Drew Aller look? Does he look comfortable? What happens at right tackle? And you and I, we can get into that a little bit because James Franklin talked Monday, and John, we're still not getting a depth chart, but I know that doesn't stop you and I from having a lot of thoughts about this roster.
Yeah, James did not declare a starter at right tackle, but did say that Anthony Donkoh and Nolan Rucci, Donkoh, of course, being a redshirt freshman, and Rucci being a transfer from Wisconsin who has 2 years of eligibility remaining. I think he's technically a redshirt junior, but the COVID year impacts him and all that stuff. But it seems to be a race that is very tight still, and one that, if you look at the reps at the end of the day, Saturday, barring one of the two either playing really well or playing really poorly, it's going to look like 55 to 45%, right? And who starts probably doesn't matter as much as who finishes the game. If I had to guess right now, I would still say Donkoh is a starter. I don't know that matters all that much because it's going to be such a split in reps. And that being said, I do think he is the higher upside play in the long run too. And I think he is the long-term solution at right tackle. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him finishing games, and maybe that number is closer to like 65-35 at some point this year. And Rucci's getting time at left tackle as well, because I think he can be a really good swing tackle. But I would give Donkoh an edge still in that regard. I just don't know how much it's going to matter until, say, USC even in October.
Yeah, and this to me it goes back to you let these camp competitions bleed into early season games. And obviously, against a really good West Virginia team, it's a little bit different in that, you have to have your best guys out there for this one. But, I think it's one of those scenarios, and we've seen it a lot with the offensive line here the last few years, where multiple guys are going to play. Maybe it's set up where one of these guys gets most of the first half, and then you kind of see that switch take place right before the half. They've done that before. We've seen it previously with like every couple series, they've rotated tackles. So I think regardless of who starts and who rotates in, the fact that they feel comfortable with both guys is a really good sign, and that's kind of what you want. And because we're like kind of sticking with that offensive line, we talked to Nick Dawkins on Tuesday on Zoom, team captain, and you talk to Nick Dawkins for any amount of time and you can easily tell and hear why. Right, the guy is just one of those people, and Drew Aller even said it this preseason, where I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines of, when Nick talks, like, no matter what it is, he's given the best advice and you're going to listen to him, right? Whether that's about football, life, kind of regardless. He just has that much respect and kind of demands and commands that entire offense, which is really interesting. But since we're there, John, and I know we can't get past the center position without talking about your guy, James Franklin did say that Cooper Cousins is greenlit for the season, meaning that they plan to burn his red shirt. So I'm curious what that looks like on Saturday, right? Is he talking, maybe do we see him on, field goal, extra point in that type of situation, or are they going to throw him in the fire at all behind Dawkins at any point? Or do we think maybe he's playing elsewhere along the interior?
I think he is rotating in at guard in all likelihood. I feel like you probably don't want to rotate as much at center. That calling protections and stuff like that is really important. And and when you're swapping out centers, like, you don't want to change the snap for the quarterback that frequently and stuff like that. So I would think that they would probably ride with Dawkins at center for the most part, and get Cousins in at guard, where I think he can rotate in and be a starter level player right off the jump. I think he's proven that pretty quickly, according to seemingly everyone in the program, right? I haven't heard anyone say a negative thing about him yet. And so I think he's in position to get starters reps, right? Where, you have 3 guards who are playing starters reps. They're all getting 70% or 67% of the reps, and they split it between the 3 of them. And so you have a guy in there that is inexperienced and doesn't have experience in these big games, but by the end of it, he's much more ready for everything else that comes the rest of the season in Los Angeles when they play USC, in Madison when they play Wisconsin, against Ohio State. Like, I've said this before, I wouldn't be surprised if he's starting by the time that rolls around. That's not a knock on the guys who are in there at guard either. Like, I think they're both quality starters in the Big Ten. I just think at some point he's kind of inevitable. And there is one of the reasons you don't redshirt him is because what are the chances he's even coming back? Like, there's a real world where he's not back for a 4th year, let alone a 5th year,
John,
so I don't think you have to be as concerned about that.
I'm not gonna let you live that down. He's inevitable. Death, taxes, Cooper Cousins seeing the field this year. That's gonna be John's. That's gonna be like your tagline.
Listen, that works. I'm not. If I'm gonna put my name by anything with this team this year, I think the thing I'm most confident is Cooper Cousins being good.
In a freshman offensive lineman, you are sold in, and I don't disagree with you. That's the other part. Like, I think you've been right about this guy for a long time. Physically, every time we see him, he does not look like a true freshman. He does not operate like a true freshman, right? That's kind of everything we've heard, we've seen. Just a very confident person, very serious person. Was committed here for an extremely long time, which kind of almost made it, in some regards, kind of easy to forget about Cooper Cousins, because James Franklin always points back to how low maintenance his recruitment was. The anecdote James always tells us is that Cooper talked with his family, kind of walked around the corner, said, "Yeah, hey, I'm committing," and like that was it. There was no like, "Are you sure?" Blah blah blah. It was not. No, we're good. We're staying. So yeah, that Penn State is certainly about to reap the rewards of that commitment and that longstanding relationship this year. So you have that, right? Now, the receiving corps, we got a little bit of injury update this week. I was doing some fishing, as I'm sure our listeners are happy to hear. I was going in there, and we did not see Liam Clifford on the practice field last week. We did not see Kaden Saunders on the practice field last week. Again, we're there for about 15 minutes. It is not the be-all, end-all. If someone is there, they can come after we leave. They can get ushered on and off the field if we're there, if we're not there. So it's not truly indicative of anything. But James Franklin, again, spoke highly of Liam Clifford, who really has had a very nice preseason from the sounds of it, from everything we've heard. But he did say that Kaden Saunders is dealing with some bumps and bruises, which in Franklin speak is like typically some sort of injury, because he doesn't like to get into the details of it. But James said that they're hopeful that Kaden Saunders plays on Saturday. So we'll see on that one. But I think the bigger impact of that, to me, is if Kaden Saunders can't go on Saturday, and we'll find out warm-ups. You and I will both be there in Morgantown. We actually get pregame field access. So if you follow both of us on Twitter, you'll be able to check that out. Me at Odd Snyder 4 and John at
John Sauber. Come on now, Audrey.
Wow, very basic. However,
yeah, listen, not many people are seeking out that Twitter handle.
Well, we all just kind of roll with that Brett Favre 4, and we've kept it for all these years. Yeah, that's what it was.
That's tough.
That's a very tough look. But we kind of we'll have that, kind of see what the rotation looks like. But for me, if Kaden Saunders can't go, the biggest impact there is on special teams, because he's the punt returner. So Jalen Reed is someone that perhaps could get a look there if Saunders can't go. But for us, that's kind of something to monitor for sure.
Yeah, and you asked that about Liam, and I followed up with kind of the other receivers that are standing out, right? And James listed a few guys: Anthony Ivy, Mekhi Flowers, and Tyler Johnson, as guys that I don't want to paraphrase this, because I think it's important to have James's words on this, just because he's very precise usually with what he says and how he phrases things, right? And he said the end of that quote was about those three. Those are guys that are going to need to step up for us and have shown enough this year. Oh boy, this is not the greatest transcription I've ever seen, if I'm being honest, to be excited about what they're going to be. Tyzier Denmark as a new player is in that conversation as well. And so I think those, to me, at least, it sounds like those guys are not ready, right? Like that is a sort of call to action, if you will, for those guys to get better or show consistency or to show that they can have real reps. Because if you think about it, if Caden, I know you said that it's a bigger impact on the punt return game, but think about the receivers that they have if he can't go. It's Tre Wallace and Liam Clifford, who we've heard about all fall camp, that those guys are standing out. It's Julian Fleming and Omari Evans, and that's it. Like, you don't
Tyler
have
Warren, come on down.
right. Like, this
Oprah
is
Bueller, come on down.
yeah, and I think if Saunders can't go on Saturday, or if he's limited in any way, shape, or form, I think we're going to find out just how much Andy Kotelnicki wants to go away from 11 personnel, right? Like, are we going to see a lot of 21 personnel with 2 running backs out there? We're going to see 31 personnel with 3 running backs out there. I think it's safe to say we'll see a lot of 12 with 2 tight ends.
Even you look at, and to me, this goes back to what James Franklin said all offseason, which I know has given a lot of people pause and panic that the offense won't be drastically different. But yeah, they ran a ton of 12 personnel last 2 years, really. So I don't think they're going to drastically get away from that. And we have, obviously, Tyler Warren is going to be an X factor. But I do think a little bit of that tight end depth could get interesting this year. But yeah, how they approach this is going to be fascinating to see. But for us, I think there's also going to be a lot of intrigue on the warmups for these receivers, just in that we haven't seen a ton of them in like actual situations. So even as you get lower on that depth chart that we don't have, but if we had it, the one in our minds, right? If you kind of get lowered on that depth chart, you just want to see how these guys look, right? We saw Tasir Denmark when he got here in the summer. We've heard, and you mentioned it here, we've heard a little bit about him. He's kind of a name that I know Justin Lustig had mentioned last week on special teams, potentially, and saying, hey, if he's going to be somebody that they're going to play this year, and they're still not committed to that, but if he is, then they like to use him on special teams as well. So you're going to have to kind of see, I think, especially all throughout non-conference play, how this kind of fares for these guys, especially.
Yeah, and honestly, I think those are the two biggest spots, right? That right tackle and that wide receiver. 3, 4, 5 spot. That I say spot, it's 3 of them. And how much they're going to rotate guys in too, because I have to think Liam Clifford and Tre Wallace are going to be out there a ton. It seems like every indication is that will be
assuming Clifford is fine, right? That's the other piece of this.
And I continue to be pretty surprised by maybe not the lack of Julian Fleming buzz, but like the fact that he is not clearly beating out some of these guys. I think the film from last year will tell you that he is at least the second best receiver on this roster. And, maybe Liam Clifford has taken that substantial of a step forward, but I'm fairly surprised that he's in a group with Kaden and Omari and not necessarily in a group among the top 3. So we'll see how that plays out, because I think that's going to be really interesting too, is how much Fleming plays, what situations he plays in, when he gets targeted. Again, I know I've said that some of the things that he is knocked for, maybe not being able to create after the catch enough, is just not something that I think Penn State's in position to be worried about any receiver doing everything, right? Like, I think you can expect Tre Wallace to be that kind of dynamic, do-it-all receiver, but anything past that, I think if you can get someone out there who can create separation and who can bring in passes, and you trust that they're going to make those catches, and they're not going to, and by the way, they're going to be in the right place at the right time. They're going to block. They're going to do all the little things. Like, I have a really hard time believing that isn't someone that you wouldn't want out there more consistently with your offense, because as we know, Andy Kotelnicki is going to run the ball this weekend. I've spent the last month learning a lot about Andy, and I think that's one of the things we're going to see. Yes, that Andy cares very much about the running game and using it and running creatively too, right? Like, we know this isn't going to be a straightforward, they're running inside zone 35 times and that's the end of it. This is going to be a creative running game. It's going to be a creative offense. And I would have to think that involves Fleming maybe a little more than we're being led to believe, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, I know Andy Kotelnicki said last week, we were talking, I asked him about Julian Fleming because I was curious. I wanted to know, because we haven't heard a lot about him this preseason, just in terms of buzz. And he said that Julian would even agree that he had a slow start to camp. and that the back half, he really turned it on. Sounds like he's trending upward. But Andy said that there were, some plays during that first half of preseason that Julian wanted back, right? So I think maybe that's why we haven't heard a ton, because they don't want to hype a guy up, especially if he's not truly a cut above at that point. But I do think there's probably also some validity to the fact that if he does look good during the back half of camp, which it sounds like he does and he has, um, they also don't want to gas him up too much, right? Because
Yeah.
you've got a whole room of guys you have to keep healthy, and that you have to keep healthy and engaged. You've got to keep these guys happy and in the competition. So I think, and you mentioned earlier about James Franklin always being very measured with what he says. And that's because, when he's talking to us, it's not just us, it's the players, it's the parents, it's the high school coaches, it's the recruits, because the messaging around this stuff, they think a lot about. And that's kind of part of it. I did want to get on quickly the kicking competition, John, because that's the other place where there are some uncertainties headed into Saturday. Penn State has not named a starting field goal kicker. Now, Gabe Nwosu should handle kickoffs again. We know Riley Thompson's the punter. Nick Singleton's going to continue as the kick returner for the majority of the time, at least is the way it sounds. And we'll see if they work in some other running backs back there as well. We'll see. We talked about punt returners with Kaden Saunders and without Kaden Saunders potentially as well. But James said that the trio of kickers have all been pretty consistent throughout camp in terms of competing with one another. The numbers that he rattled off, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, that they were each separated by only about a percentage point. Now, he didn't tell us who was leading, but one of them was at 85%, one at 84, and one at 83. When you heard those numbers, John, 85, 84, 83, did you have any concern, any panic for the field
They
goal
better be
kickers?
scoring a lot of touchdowns. Was my first reaction,
A lot of
because
fourth down attempts may be coming.
yeah, I understand that they try to recreate real stadium environments in practice. They have music blaring. They have guys yelling at the kid. You know what I mean? Like, they are
James
on those
Franklin
guys to try
yells,
and,
gets right in their face. Yeah.
yeah, like they are trying to create a scenario that is that makes them as game ready as possible,
Mhm.
basically. That being said, those numbers seem a little, and who knows? Maybe he was just pulling numbers out of thin air. It didn't kind of feel like he was.
I mean, maybe
Uh,
they're having him do a lot of crazy attempts too. That's the other
yeah,
thing, right? Like, who knows?
right. But I do think that you would obviously want to hear those numbers be higher. I am curious to see how aggressive they are on fourth down, anyways. Right? Like,
Mhm.
James has generally been pretty good about following the chart, which is kind of what you're supposed to do.
The return of the chart. Yes, we
Yeah,
always a few
and
times a year. Yes, we always
listen,
hear about the chart.
I'm an advocate of the
Mhm.
chart. Like, I think you should
I
follow
get
it
it.
to a
Yeah.
T. Like, that's how you get the math to work out on your side, is by following it consistently. When you try and pick and choose your spots, that's when the sample size gets swayed. Uh, but I would think, with the way that Andy Kotelnicki coaches, with James's proclivity for the chart anyways, that, like, this is they're probably going to be pretty aggressive in those situations. They should be. They should have an offense that should excel in fourth and short and fourth and medium situations, especially with the running backs they have, with the two quarterbacks they have, with someone like Tyler Warren. Like, they should be in position to succeed in those spots. And I wonder if the kickers aren't kind of at the point they want them to be, if they're, maybe uh, a little bit more aggressive than originally anticipated on fourth down, on those, goal to go situations.
Yeah, James Franklin said that they feel confident. They feel like they can win with all three of those. But to me, that is going to be another fascinating spot on Saturday, and kind of what is, that distance that you feel comfortable with any of those three guys, right? Like, we've seen it a few times where it's been okay. We have one guy handle extra points, another guy handle field goals. What was it with Jake Pinniger? There was I forget what the mark was with the yardage, but it was
It was
whatever
around
an
the
in,
40 or
it's
something.
pin, right? They had a little rhyme,
Yeah.
whatever an in, it's pin, whatever an out, stout. I remember that one. I was like, oh, okay, it's a good way to think of it. But like, so we've seen stuff like that before. I don't know if they're gonna kind of follow that again this year, but that is definitely something, warm ups, pregame, throughout the game, to keep an eye on, because this should be a really good, really compelling week one matchup. James Franklin was not, which is pretty much status quo, was not taking any bulletin board material, wasn't taking any shots at the opponent, which we don't see. But there have been things out of Morgantown the last couple weeks, right? I can see
Yeah.
John's getting mad already as I mentioned this. There were some things that have been brought up
Well, it
about
just seems like,
Penn State last year, the touchdown late in the game. It sounds
yeah,
like West Virginia's trying to manufacture some things to me.
you and I have gotten on James for in-game decisions for things that we disagree with in the
Mhm.
past. I just think it's a little silly to be upset about that touchdown. They were getting their backup quarterback reps. Like, you don't stop playing the game just because you're losing. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I think the outrage is pretty ridiculous to be upset about something like that. But more power to you. I will say, I was listening to Neil Brown's press conference yesterday. The one thing he said was like, "Listen, if you gotta go to that to get motivation, then like that didn't sound like something he really wanted, right? Like that this idea that your motivation is born out of that decision to continue with their foot on the gas last year. They should, and I agree with this assessment from Neil Brown. They should have enough motivation as it is, right? They're an underdog at home in a season where they're coming off of a really good end of the year where they were, Brown was on the hot seat, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden that was nowhere near the case, and he is. It seems to be pretty locked in there in Morgantown at this point, especially with, if they play how I think we all expect them to this year. And so I think the need to manufacture that outrage and that bulletin board material is a little silly. I've seen it, right? Like there were players who are saying that they're kind of fixated on that's stuck in their head or whatever. But I just think it's like Brown said, if you have to go to that for motivation, then it's probably not ideal. You should have enough motivation as it is heading into this matchup.
Yeah, to me, it's unusual, I think. But again, you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, any
Right. Like
slight
that's the other part of
perceived or
this.
otherwise, like I get it.
Yeah.
What I did laugh at though was when James Franklin said that they will not like create fake headlines to try, which I
Yes.
took that as pointing back to Ole Miss
Oh,
last year and
I
Lane
don't think there
Kiffin and
was
that whole
any
thing.
interpreting needed. I think that was a
Mhm.
clear shot at Lane Kiffin's staff for literally making up quotes from guys like Kobe King and putting
Which
them
was
on
such
Twitter.
a dumb thing that I just had forgotten
Yes.
about, and then it was like, "Oh,
That's
yeah, this happened." Yeah.
I laughed pretty loud when he mentioned it because I forgot about it. And it's that was a very dumb thing to happen. Frankly, a dumb thing to do. Uh
Extremely, yeah.
again, like obviously it didn't matter in the end. Ole Miss wins the game, but like I don't understand the need to like create these things, right? Like this, we saw it when I think it was when Georgia won the national title. We saw that no one believed in us.
Oh,
It's like they
yeah,
were
yeah.
number one in the country. like everyone believed in you. Like this, all of this, this culture of like motivation created by your haters or whatever. Like it's like there's a meme on Twitter I see frequently. Like it's the oh, I thought Twitter said that Steph Curry isn't a good 3-point shooter. It's like nobody said that. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're just making things up.
Well,
Uh
John, we're gonna make John print out every mean tweet he's ever gotten, and
no,
he's
we do
gonna put
not
them
need
on
to
the
do that.
bulletin board in his home, and every time before he opens his laptop to write a story, he's gonna find motivation in that.
It's not the tweets, it's the YouTube comments, it's the emails.
YouTube.
By the way, if you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button, as Audrey mentioned
John
earlier.
wants
That
he does not dye his hair, he wants to clear that up too.
no, I did forget about that.
Speaking of
No,
coming,
I don't know if you can tell. I usually my hair actually does look very dark right now.
it's
But
just the lighting.
sometimes, yeah, it's I'm in a dark room right now. I have a one of those ring lights in front of me that I could turn on. You know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about, that you see on social media to
The
light you
diva
up. But
lights, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's
I don't own one of those.
listen, I got it sent to me for free. I'm not going to say no to that. But it is a rather gloomy day here in Pleasant Gap. But yes, I do not dye my hair. I thought that was very funny.
I just wanted to make sure we got that
As
out there
as my
clear in
wife
the air.
pointed out, I do have like a few gray hairs. Like that's not
That's
ideal. But
and that
at
probably,
29 years
John,
old, but like
that started probably over time, 7, 8, 9. That's when the hair follicles started to change for you.
yeah, that's when the stress of this job is really
Mhm.
worn down on me. But no, I have, I wanted to mention this. We've been talking a lot about Andy Kotelnicki. I did publish that story this morning. We did it over at centerdaily.com about Andy Kotelnicki. So please go check that out.
Coach
About kind of
K. If you can't spell it, Coach K. You can
his nickname actually is Cooks. And I can't remember if I told this story on
You
the podcast
teased it
last week.
week. You teased
So
it.
essentially, he was at a friend's house when he was younger, and they had a bunch of Girl Scout cookies. It's a very simple story. This is not like anything earth shattering.
I thought that was going somewhere else. Keep
No,
going.
they had a bunch of Girl Scout cookies there, and him and his buddy ripped through all of them. And then so his buddy's parents started calling him Cookies after his buddy blamed him for it, and the nickname stuck. And then it eventually got shortened to Cooks. And as his wife Lindsay told me, like he introduced himself to people in college as, "Hey, my name's Andy, but you can call me Cooks." Right? Like that was every time he met someone new. And she said when one of their first dates, she was like, "Hey, I'm gonna call you Andy." Like she's like, "I'm not gonna call you Cooks. Like, I'm gonna call you Andy." But that actually wasn't in the story. But the story does cover like a lot of his journey, which I think is really fascinating. A lot of things that he is, the places he's been, the things he's done. When he kind of really changed as a father when they had their first son, when he was essentially at Wisconsin River Falls, which was his first school. It's where he played. It's where he first coached. But I think one of the most interesting things in there that you can check out again at centerdaily.com is he had one of those injuries that doesn't, like, you don't show it on TV anymore. Like it's not replayed. The announcer cuts the commercial real quick, right? Like he dislocated and fractured his ankle. And I think he said he fractured his lower leg as well. And so essentially, as Lindsay characterized it to me, he was her and his mother knew it was bad when they saw him like face down on the turf, like squeezing the grass with his hands. And you could see that his toes were facing the other way, right? Like his body was facing down and his toes were facing up because he had done so much damage there. But yeah, no, that was he willfully showed me the scar of it when I asked him about it after a scrum here a few weeks ago, and said that was like he's like, he didn't go into shock or anything, but he's like, he was in a lot of freaking pain. Like that was like incredibly painful. I was like, I can imagine.
And that prompted his coaching career, right? That was the moment.
Yeah, that was the moment that it turned for him. He ended up asking John O'Grady, his head coach at the time, before surgery. I can't remember if it was right before. I believe it was right before surgery. John said it was right before surgery. Andy said he knew it was sometime in there that he had asked him to be a coach on the staff, and he was coaching literally the same day he got surgery to fix his ankle. They set him up with a golf cart. He was sitting on like a 5-gallon bucket at practice. Like he was immediately a coach before his college career had even ended, which I think is a good indication of how much this matters to him. His wife, Lindsay, like I said the two things that matter most to him are family and football. That's very, very apparent. And I think you had asked him about the Tigger and Eeyore stuff.
Back in the winter.
Back in the winter when he first got to Penn State. And one of the most interesting things that I thought Lindsay told me that didn't make the story is that isn't necessarily a good depiction of who Andy is, though, right? Like,
wait, are you trying to call me out right now, John?
No, because it is true.
Am I getting personally attacked for my story?
He did say this, right? Like he said that this is like what he asks guys, but she said he's very much a realist, right? Like he assesses situations and is very grounded. And I think she put it well. There's something about his humanity that is really appealing to people. Like he is just a down-to-earth guy.
I think there's a difference between being an optimist and a realist, John. I'm not taking my personal attack well here.
No, but that's what I mean. I agree. I don't think it doesn't sound like Andy is an optimist, right? Like it sounds like
tell you what, if this offense isn't improved Saturday, there's going to be a lot of Eeyores around State College. I can tell you that.
Well, that is true. But no, I think, that was really interesting to me, though, because I think that's a good thing to be in this position. If you're overly optimistic, it is harder to do the job. If you're overly pessimistic, it's hard to do the job. He is very pragmatic, very analytical in the way he thinks, very sequential in the way he thinks, as he described it to me. But yeah,
here's where I'm going to push back on this, though, John.
Okay.
I think there's a difference between, and I've taught, for my background as an education, I've taught for many years. This is the first fall I'm not teaching in about 7 or 8 years.
There's a flex.
And I think there's a difference between being who you are and being that optimist versus having to motivate 18 to 22-year-olds.
Right. No, I totally agree.
That's the differentiator there.
Yes.
So I think maybe if you're him, right, the whole Tigger Eeyore coffee cup deal is I want them to be excited
Yes.
about this, them to buy into my offense. So I think that's the point. So maybe you and I just agree on this. We just got there 2 different ways.
No, we do agree on this, but I just think it's interesting that and Andy's a guy who's read a lot of like leadership books and things like that. He's a big reader. But I do think it is interesting that he isn't necessarily like that way that he is asking his players to be. And I think that's the right thing to do, right? Like you don't want those guys to be realists. They are 18 to 23 years old. You don't
Or
want
18 to 25, right?
yeah, you don't want to beat that optimism out of someone at that young of an age, right? Like
We're making it sound like a bunch of old wretched journalists here.
yeah,
Yeah.
let life handle it. It'll take care of the job. But I think that was one of the most fascinating things. I will say one of my favorite things that didn't make the story that I know you will just maybe not despise, but will be at least indifferent about is that so his first actual coaching job after Wisconsin River Falls senior year, he gets hurt and all that, was as a GA at Western Illinois in Macomb, Illinois. And so Lindsay gets a job as a GA after looking and looking and looking. They're both GAs making, she said, $740 a month each to pay for their apartment and everything. After 1 year, they liked their apartment, they liked where they lived, but it didn't allow pets. So after 1 year, they got what she said was a worse apartment that wasn't as nice, but allowed dogs. And then they got a dog, and they still have it. Like you clearly, very clearly, you can see on like Lindsay's Instagram and everything. Like Andy loves dogs. That is abundantly clear.
What's his stance on cats?
I did not find out, and because I am not a cat person, and I don't care for people's opinions about cats.
I agree. Cats are the worst.
Listen, I am not going to isolate any listeners who have cats. My in-laws have cats, and they are very delightful. Personally, I don't like cats. Not a big cat guy. But yeah, it ended up being obviously a very long story, but I think there was a lot in there that you can learn about Andy, that a lot of stuff that frankly I didn't know, that I don't think the injury thing was out there or anything like that. That is a good look into one, like I said, his humanity, but how he thinks and how he has kind of gotten to this point because his path is really non-traditional, right? Like he was with the same head coach for over a decade, and they decided to leave that head coach because it's Penn State. Because Andy grew up a Penn State fan, and that's one of the things I wrote in the story, that his anecdote about, getting the Penn State helmet, like that wasn't like, just chum for fans to eat up, right? Like that was real. One of Lindsay's first gifts for him was a Penn State hoodie. And she said it made her emotional when he put on his first team issued one, because it was like this full circle moment. So
did we ever, John, have we ever asked, I haven't asked him, so it probably hasn't come up, Packers fan, Vikings fan?
That's a good point. No, we have not.
I'll add that to my list of important questions I need to ask. Fans care about.
I'm a little disappointed we didn't get to that in the preseason. It's a little tougher to get that when we eventually get to talk to him during the regular season. But no, we do not know where his affiliations lie.
I bring this up because I think you and I both, we cover the program in a similar way, in that we want our readers to know the people that we're covering, right?
Yes.
And that's always been how I've done the job. That's, I think, as a sports fan, right? When I'm reading about the Packers, I want to know the people that I'm rooting for. Sure, you want to know the stats, you want to know the why, the how, but I think it's really important to give your fans and your readers an understanding of who these folks are as people. And I think you did a nice job with that with your story with Andy. I've got a deep dive on Drew Aller this week, and kind of what is at stake for him this year. Talk about a polarizing draft prospect.
Yes.
For sure. And, kind of his maturation as a quarterback, but also as a person, right? And how do you handle being in the fishbowl in State College? That'll be out later this week. And you and I, of course, will then both be hitting the road to Morgantown for the game, where there are so many levels. We've gotten into a lot with this offense and kind of the changes perhaps that we see that need to take place there. John, do you have any questions or any concerns about Tom Allen's defense? Because it is easy to forget that they've got a new DC as well going into this season. Do you have any questions or concerns about this defense, particularly heading into Saturday?
No, And I think that's why it's easy to forget, right? Like, I think
Nope, none at all.
right. Like, but I think that's part of this, right? There's a lot of faith in the talent at corner being enough to replace the guys from last year. There's a lot of faith in Denai Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter, and Neil Brown mentioned Amin Vanover, and James Franklin's mentioned Amin Vanover a few times as someone who has stepped up. Like, but Brown mentioned Vanover as someone they've kind of kept their eye on, and they think he's really good too. I just think there's so much talent. We know Tom Allen is a really good defensive coordinator. The way he plays matches up with how Penn State has played in the past. I think the biggest concern is containing Garrett Green, but you have the athletes to do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how often Tom Allen's just going to make Jalen Reed a spy and have him watching Green the entire game, but I don't think it's the worst idea, right? Like, if you can limit Green as a runner, you can limit the West Virginia offense. If you can kind of take that away and force them to rely on their running backs a little more, who are good. CJ Donaldson is obviously a big back, and he's returning from last year, who is, he's not like a Nick Singleton level talent or anything, but I think he is someone that has moved positions. I believe he was a tight end before and everything too. Like, is a big guy and someone that they're going to have to worry about because they're not necessarily massive at defensive tackle. I don't know. I'm not overly concerned about what this looks like for Penn State's defense.
I want to see by the end of, it's going to be interesting to see because snap counts don't give us this divider. So it's going to be interesting to parse through what's the Abdul Carter timeshare between defensive end, outside linebacker. What does that look like? The other thing to keep in mind with this game, which is again new across the board for college football, the helmet communication.
Yes.
Right? We'll see middle linebacker Kobe King will have the green dot for the defense. Drew Aller will have it for the offense. James Franklin was talking about it this week, and they've talked quite a bit throughout the preseason about it. And I know Tom Allen has as well, Andy Kotelnicki, about how you have to really be mindful of how you're doing this, and that Penn State, like a lot of teams, has talked to different NFL players who've worn the green dot and what are maybe best practices, what's helpful. How do you make sure that the coach isn't screaming in your ear? You also have to understand that this is one-way communication, right? So how much information are you giving your quarterback or your middle linebacker? You don't want to overload them, but you also want to make sure they know the play. Andy Kotelnicki said he'll then repeat the play for Aller and give him like one tip as to, hey, remember, look out for this or whatever that might be. So that's going to be interesting because you've got Kobe King stepping into that bigger role, that leadership role. You and I, John, on our season preview, which is still available out there for any Dispatch listeners who want to double up this week before the game, you can get the season preview plus this episode. We talked about the cornerbacks and how we feel really confident that Penn State has depth in the secondary. Same holds true at safety, right? Like, I think this goes back to your point, John, of you really don't have any concerns with this group because we've seen so many of these guys. And while we haven't seen AJ Harris play here, you believe in the upside. And I think that's a big piece of Saturday for me, is just kind of seeing how these new pieces fit together. And then how does this group start to gel? Because over time, I feel like Penn State fans have been spoiled by the brand of defense that's been played around here and how spectacular it's been. Maybe there are a couple hiccups out of the gate, right? Maybe Garrett Green has a couple. I don't think so, but I think maybe there are a couple moments, right, where Garrett Green looks good. Again, this is a West Virginia team that was just outside the top 25, right? This isn't Bowling Green. This isn't Kent State. With all due respect with those programs, you and I will be having a different conversation the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
So, they're going to make some plays too, but I do think Penn State has the experience and has just the upside of talent that it shouldn't be that significant.
Yeah, and I didn't mention Jaheim White at running back too is kind of the lightning to Donaldson's thunder, like a smaller back who's quicker, faster. But I just like, even for those kind of specialist type players that West Virginia can have, I just don't think it's an issue. Like, even if there is those kind of moments that you referred to where it's like, okay, Garrett Green got loose here, I think Penn State's going to force turnovers. I think they're going to get sacks. I think this is going to be it's not going to be a blowout, obviously, but I think maybe it's getting a little overstated how close this is going to be. And I do think, and maybe this will change after we see a few weeks of action, but I do think West Virginia is probably the second best team they're going to play this year. I just think it's a really bad matchup for West Virginia. I just think like they're a little too one-dimensional, and I think their athleticism offensively probably isn't going to be as overpowering as I guess they would need it to be. And then on the other side of the ball, like Penn State's offense was at its best against West Virginia last year, right? Like this was when everyone thought everything was fine. Gerard looked really good. Like I don't know that there's a ton of reason to think they'll be worse with Andy Kotelnicki instead of Mike Yurcich against West Virginia.
Is there any? This is not gonna make me many friends. Is there any reason to believe if Penn State's offense looks really good Saturday that it can't be sustained? Because we did see that last year, right? Like I think in the back of your mind, you still have to remember, oh yeah, I remember being there in Beaver Stadium last year, and it's like, oh yeah, Keandre Lambert-Smith looks good, Drew Aller looks good, and then everything changed. Is there any reason that fans maybe should keep that in the back of their minds, or am I just overthinking things?
No, I think it's fair. And I think, frankly, if you think that way, you may feel that way until November 2nd. Like, I just don't know that there's going to be a matchup that gives you enough confidence. USC's defense has been last year was like abjectly terrible. Will be better this year, presumably.
Former Nittany Lion, Danton Lynn.
Yeah, Wisconsin should have a good defense. But I just like if you feel that way after West Virginia, and I think it's reasonable to, by the way, I just don't know that you can then watch the next 6 or 7 games and have anything really change your mind, right? Like I think this is going to be the only opportunity until maybe Wisconsin that you have, and maybe UCLA too, where you can say, okay, they did it against a half decent unit, right? Like it's not going to be a problem this year. That being said, I think this is part of our job and part of, what I presumably would be writing if they look good on Saturday and my good, bad, ugly and my day after column. I just think it will be about how they did it, right? Last year, maybe there were some things that should have been indicators, right? Like that guys were wide open. There were blown assignments by West Virginia that led to it more than anything that Penn State was doing. I think that we probably should have seen that the wide receivers weren't necessarily even consistent in that game, even when they were playing well. I think that will be pretty telling. I think obviously it's our first data point of Andy Kotelnicki as Penn State's offensive coordinator. I think what the offense looks like from a play design, a play calling standpoint is the most important thing, because I do think he is a good enough offensive coordinator to scheme around some deficiencies at receiver. But I think there's just a too much up in the air, essentially, I guess, to put a blanket. Like if they look good, it's good. If they look good, it's bad. You know what I mean? Like I think there's too much in play right now to kind of know either way.
But John, can these wide receivers create separation, right? That's another thing to keep an eye on, especially the vantage point that you and I get for games, which is why it's so important when you're there. You can actually see things develop, because you're up so high where you'll be able to tell a little bit better than you can on TV, kind of how some of these things are playing out. John, on our season preview, you and I had all of our bold predictions, I don't want to say bets, but our what do we call them?
The game we played.
We played a game and we had some picks, either ors. That's what it was, either or. Yes. It's not. I don't want to say bets, and we're gonna get shut down by gamblers now.
I bet enough as it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're probably coming for you regardless. One of the things we did not pick. You mentioned earlier you think Penn State's going to create some takeaways. First takeaway of the season goes to who?
I feel like the obvious choice here is Zakee Wheatley. I'll just go with that. That feels like
you're leaning into the takeaway king.
Yeah. And the fact that he'll be playing a little deeper, presumably. And the other part of this is they're going to get enough pressure, and Allen's going to bring enough heat that you're bound to get a pass that is lobbed up, or Garrett Green gets hit as he throws or something like that. Could also see, I think the other obvious option is a strip sack from one of those guys. But if it's going to be a pick, I'm going to take Zakee Wheatley.
Well, that's good because I'll take AJ Harris. So that way you and I can kind of have that side chatter throughout the press box. Real quick, before we give our game predictions, one other question for you. Who is the player that we'll be talking most about on Sunday?
Well, this is good. I actually have a story that is going up about this on Wednesday morning too, like a preview story. And I'm glad you asked this. My MVP for the game is Tyler Warren. I think we are going to see that he is the number one receiving option. I think we're going to see him have an elite year, like nationally, right? Like I think he's going to establish himself as one of the top 2 tight ends in the country. And I think he's going to have a big game, like the kind of 8 to 10 target, 90 plus yards and a touchdown, used creatively by Andy Kotelnicki. It is fallen by the wayside a little bit that he did play quarterback in high school, so I would be curious to see if he gets used in any type of
If
gadget
Neil
play or anything
Brown
like
is a
that.
Nittany Dispatch listener, you just
Yeah,
informed him.
I
Yeah.
alerted him to that.
Mhm.
But no, I think Tyler Warren is the guy that is going to be the standout come Sunday morning.
I'm going to go differently on you there again. I'm going to go Tre Wallace. I think so much of this offseason is about the number one wide receiver. Who is it? I've said for at least the last month that I think and believe he is the number one. I think we are going to see a couple, at least maybe one, but I said couple now. I have to commit to two.
Yeah, I was going to say that
Acrobatic
you said
plays.
couple, not me.
Yeah, I said couple acrobatic catches from Tre Wallace. Remember, a couple years ago, he had that video in the weight room with like a 40 or 40 plus inch vertical. Super impressive athlete. So he's kind of my pick there. Are we ready for scores, John? Are we
Yes.
there? Because
By the
we have
way,
not discussed this. So
yeah,
we,
worth
we
noting
know
too that
that we both have the same postseason outlook, but game by
yeah,
game we have not discussed.
worth noting that I think Tre Wallace looks bigger too. I had noticed that when we
Mhm.
talked to him last week that he looks stronger. Neither here nor there, but something I think that fans might notice come Saturday. I am going with Penn State scoring the exact amount of points that they did last year against West Virginia and winning 38-23, and with like a late West Virginia touchdown to make it closer. I think like this might be kind of close early. I just think Penn State's defense is too good, and I expect the offense to take the leap. And again, I keep going back to, and I understand that West Virginia at the beginning of last year was not West Virginia at
Mhm.
the end of last
Right.
year or the beginning of this year, but I keep going back to what they were able to accomplish and what we all considered a pretty bad year for the offense, relative to expectations, to say the least. It was
Mhm.
still like, I know people probably don't agree with this. It was still kind of a good offense. But I think I have 38-23, excuse me. I think Drew Allar looks good. I think the offense looks good. I think Andy Kotelnicki proves, or at least shows right away that he is worth it. We'll see if that sustains, but I think week one that this is going to be maybe a little nerve-wracking for a quarter or two, but relatively smooth sailing after that.
You couch that by saying touchdown late. I'm a little surprised you have the defense giving up that many points. My score prediction is Penn State 27, West Virginia 14.
Okay.
I'm expecting a little bit more. Now, maybe John, does either of us have the offense running up the score late?
No, that's what I mean. Like that's
So
West
that's
Virginia
okay.
gets that late score
So
that
West
that
Virginia
makes it
gets
look
the
a little
late score,
better.
but Penn State's not running up the score.
Right, correct.
Okay.
And by the way, the to get to the 23, it's 3 touchdowns, one 2-point conversion late that they don't get and a field goal. So for
Okay.
clarity's
But
sake.
to be clear, West Virginia is not coming out with the swinging gate 2-point conversion.
Listen, say what you will, but Florida State ran the swinging gate
You
against
you
Georgia
can
Tech,
yeah, I was gonna say that's gonna be
and
our
it
maybe, like,
worked.
our weekly segment. That could be our new thing, our
I may
new
or may not have sent a text to you and fellow beat writers Johnny McGonigal and Daniel Gallen when I saw that and said somewhere Mike Yursich is smiling after that successful swinging gate. So yes, I will monitor that every time I see the swinging gate. It's hard not to think of that
I've
that fateful Michigan day last year.
that day. I have one last question for you, John, now that we have our scores locked in there. We both have Penn State winning. Bo Prabula. On Saturday night when you and I gathered to talk, hopefully in the press box in Morgantown,
Yes.
will Bo Prabula have 5 or more snaps on Saturday? Just overall,
Oh,
whether that's, gadget plays, whether that's as QB2, 5 or more snaps.
Audrey, you got to set these lines better. That's an easy over for me.
Okay.
That is, you can tell which one of us is the degenerate here. But
And it
I,
is
I
not
think,
me.
yeah, I do think that Bo Prabula probably plays closer to 10 plus snaps offensively. I think they're going to try to get him involved heavily. And frankly, if they are up, 38 to 14, 38 to 17, like I think they will be late, then he probably gets some snaps there too, right? Like
Mhm.
I think he's going to be heavily involved, and that is going to be one of the things that we end up talking about. Maybe this is something we can start doing. Not just the player that we are talking about after, but the sort of headline, I guess, of the post game show. To me, I think it will end up being Bo Prabula's usage, and that he is like this is very real.
Well, I was the player we were talking about on Sunday. I almost went there with Bo Prabula,
Yeah.
but I wanted to try and paint you in a corner with that question first. Um, Now, I think, John, maybe what you forgot is that, and we've seen this change the last few years, but you never know, he might revert.
4
Early
possessions. I
on,
know.
no. Early on, the narrative was that James Franklin would always keep his quarterback in the games too late, right? Like you go back to
Yeah.
Christian Hackenberg taking an absolute pounding at Temple. There were a lot of examples over time of that, right? Where, um, he'd keep the quarterback in too long. So that was kind of my other thought process there. But yeah, I think there is going to be an interesting conversation to be had with Bo Prabula and his usage this year for sure. Definitely something for us to track along with explosive plays. I need to update my metrics there so we can start tracking those this year. But yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot to discuss. And I mean, John, our post game shows are our best because you and I are both just like loopy usually,
Exhausted.
and
Yes.
coming after
I'm
a noon kick, we're going to set the bar a little higher for ourselves this year.
I don't know. I think I tend to perform worse at noon kicks. Because the caffeine starts at like 9 a.m. and I'm not stopping for 12 hours. Like it is. I was talking to some people about like what the press box is going to look like in the future, and like the food situation, all that stuff. Is like, listen, as long as there's caffeine up there, I don't think any of us will really care all that much.
Whoa! Don't, not so much, John. Come on now. We
What?
need at least respectable accommodations. Yeah.
Listen, I need caffeine. Like I don't need anything else. I can function as long as I have caffeine in my laptop. Like that's what it takes. I'm curious though, now that I'm going to put you on the spot since I made this up as we go. But what do you think we are talking about on Sunday, or excuse me, Saturday night when we're recording? Like, what is the thing you think we lead the show with that comes from this game?
It's going to be the offense because that's the main storyline, right? How does the offense look? How does Drew Aller look? What did Andy Kotelnicki do creatively? Because I think that's the biggest narrative right now. Yeah, like that's the thing that matters most this season in the context of the playoff, right? If Penn State's going to do what both you and I said it's going to do and make the playoff field this year, this offense needs to be drastically improved. So I think that's what we're talking about Saturday night. Now you've got some offshoots of that too, which being the receiving core and those types of things. But yeah, I think, and it's probably going to be the case the next few weeks. Again, the conversation is still all going to be about this offense and kind of everything that we keep learning about it as this season goes and evolves.
Is it positive or negative? The conversation.
Well, John, I was going to grab my Tigger mug and tell you that it was going to be a
say
positive conversation, but now it sounds like you're trying to be an Eeyore about it. No, I think it's going to be a positive conversation. I mean, I picked him to win. Putting up 27 points, I know is not exactly like the most biggest confidence boost, I guess, but like, again, this is not a bad team that they're playing. I think that's the other piece of this.
Yeah, and I think it matters what it looks like more than anything. And we will obviously be here to discuss that. But at the end of last week's season preview, you and I teased a little bit for this week, a little, for anyone who's curious about predictions, we'll leave this at the end here, this podcast, now that we're like 50 some minutes in. We said we would discuss who we think, or at least go over who we think makes the college football playoff, then who our Final Four is, and who we have as the national champ. Would you like to go first with your 12 teams, or would you like me to go first with my 12 teams?
I'll go first. Do you just want me to read them off 1 through 12? Is that what you want? And then
the four conference champs, and then obviously the conference they're winning, and then your next 8 after that.
All right. So, well, we'll do it this way. I've got Ohio State as my 1 seed, which I think might be a little bit bold. Some Georgia fans might be angry at me.
I think you're hearing people booing around State College right now.
That sound you hear is me getting mercilessly booed.
Yes.
2nd seed Georgia, which again I think fair. Utah is my 3. Clemson is 4. John, he's taking notes right now. For those of you that are listening, John's taking notes because he's trying to mirror my bracket with his own picks.
No, I'm going to keep track of this at the end of the year. See who's closer.
I got him here. Got Oregon at 5. Now this 6 is a ride. Ole Miss.
You are slightly higher on Ole Miss than I am. 6
is definitely a choice. 7 is Texas, which you and I talked about 7-10 last week.
Yes.
A lot. 7 is Texas. 8 is Notre Dame. and the 8-9 matchup of Notre Dame LSU, which feels very
LSU.
fascinating. Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a thing for us to monitor throughout the year because I'm not nearly as high on this LSU team as everybody else is. I think I'm just missing something.
We will certainly know more about LSU after week 1.
Yes.
10, I'd mentioned last week I have Penn State as my 10 seed, which would mean Penn State plays Texas in the 10-7 matchup. 11, Bama. And 12, I guess I can call them our friends, although Penn State fans probably wouldn't. But after the Cotton Bowl, it really didn't matter. Memphis as our 12 seed. And then, so the final 4, then I have Ohio State versus Oregon, with Ohio State winning. Georgia versus Bama, which, again, absolute choice there.
Some
with
Big
Georgia
10 SEC
winning.
semis.
Mm-hmm. And because all of this talk this year, John, has been about how the expanded playoff is going to be great. We're going to get all these entertaining matchups. Yeah, I still have Ohio State playing Georgia for the national title game, but I have Ohio State winning.
Again, the booing. It's just so loud that I can. It is all I can hear.
I get it. It's fair. I get it. It's fair. How about you?
I went a little less chalky. I think this is part of what we're going to learn is that there's going to be a lot of chaos, right? Like it's just going to look really different than we anticipate. And I think that's going to be true most years from here moving forward. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's still just chalk 1 through 12. This is what it looks like. And I think that's more about the conference expansion than the playoff expansion, right? Like it's just going to create weirdness. But I have Oregon as the number 1 seed. I have them as the only team in the Big Ten to lose fewer than 2 games, essentially.
Okay.
I think every other team in the Big Ten loses 2. Georgia is the 2 seed. I have Clemson as my ACC champ as the 3 seed, and Kansas State as the 4 seed and my Big 12 champ.
Your boy Dante Cephas, you just can't let him go.
This is more about Avery Johnson than it is about Dante Cephas, I promise.
Can't let him go.
But yeah, and listen, I said last week that I believe in Avery Johnson more than I do Will Howard. Well, I have Kansas State ahead of Ohio State in my playoff bracket. I have Alabama as the 5, Ohio State as the 6, Ole Miss is the 7, and then the 8-9 matchup is, again, as you said, Texas, Penn State in Austin, with Texas as the 8 and Penn State as the 9. As I really still can't believe that you and I came to the same conclusion for Penn State's season. That close together too.
We got there different ways too.
Yeah, we still got to Austin in the end. Notre Dame is the 10 seed, Virginia Tech as the 11 seed, and how can I not include Texas State as the 12 seed, as the Group of 5 conference champion? Big believer in Jordan McLeod, and GJ Kenny is the quarterback. I think
you're also a big believer in Brent Pry.
Big believer in Kyron Drones too. Like I think that offense is going to be really good. But yeah, like I think Pry has done a good job. I think they're going to have they're in position to have a big year. The Final 4 is where it got a little more chalky for me. I have Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, and Bama as my 4 semifinalists, with Oregon then facing facing Bama, right? Yeah, with the way this works out,
okay.
Because Bama's the 5 seed, and then Georgia facing Ohio State as the 2 non-conference champs, the same as you, making into the semis. And then I went with ultimately winning the national title game, the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'm just a believer in Kalen DeBoer. I'm a believer in Jalen Milroe. I'm a believer in that offense. I think Kane Womack is an excellent defensive coordinator. Like, I think they kind of crushed it with putting that staff together. I don't know. I can't shake this feeling that we're going to see, for all the talk about you don't want to be the guy that replaces the guy and all of that. I just really believe in Kalen DeBoer, and I think he has more talent in Alabama than he's ever had before. Getting guys like Jeremy Bernard and Parker Brailsford to transfer there from Washington, like, they're really good. Like, and I think they're going to be really good. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if they're number 1 in the country at the end of the year, and that they were the team that everyone looks back on and we're like, oh yeah, why didn't we see this coming from the beginning?
I think we've now successfully angered everyone, John, because Penn State fans, I'm sure, have seen a lot of projections that have Penn State playing Alabama in the first round. So now you've just got people scared about Alabama, and you and I both are high on them.
You should be. Like, everyone should be afraid of Alabama. Jalen Milroe is really, really good. And
until proven otherwise, right? Like, but that's probably a good place for us to leave it. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Also, if you're listening to us and you enjoy what you hear, regardless of our predictions, but you like the content, tell a friend. The Nittany Dispatch. We will be here twice a week from now throughout the rest of the season. We will be
Yes.
back post game Saturday. We will have this in your feeds by Sunday morning, so you will have either your post-game celebration with us Sunday morning, your post-game commiseration with us, either or. We're going to be with you throughout the rest of the season.
I will say, I think, and maybe this is the jinx of all jinx, so
Oh
sorry for
no!
Penn State
Oh
fans.
no!
I don't see a lot of scenarios where Penn State loses this game. Like I think it's probably been overstated how close this is from a talent standpoint, I guess. And again, I think they're the second best team Penn State's going to face all year, but I do think like that's not necessarily the highest compliment given Penn State's schedule outside of Ohio State. But
The
I
John
digress.
Sauber kiss of death, ladies and
Yeah,
gentlemen.
I'm sorry for anyone. And listen, for our listeners, if I do this to you guys, I really am sorry. I don't mean to. I haven't been a jinxer in the past, so we'll see if I can just ruin
Some,
that
yeah,
for
some of
everybody.
us have a little more jinx capabilities than others, but I will
Yeah,
withhold my comments for
that's right.
later times.
But I
But
think
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned it. You're going to have that great story on Drew Aller up this week. I have my story on Andy Kotelnicki up at centerdaily.com. You can find that Aller story at The Athletic on the mobile app, on the website. Audrey, I'm sure, will be tweeting it. You can find Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4. You can find me at John Sauber. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.